everyone for attending today. I'm going to share my screen right now for, oh, I'm actually not allowed to share my screen. I think maybe that can be a setting. Okay, I think I should be able to now. Perfect. Oh. All right, can you confirm if you can see that? Okay. Awesome. All right, great. Thank you so much. I will get started then. So just a little background on GiveWell. We started with the simple question, where should I donate? In 2007, our co-founders were working at a hedge fund and they tried to research this question on their own, but we're finding it a lot more difficult than they anticipated. It's a lot harder to find actual information on what organizations actually do and the impacts that they have on people that they are working with. So they decided to leave their jobs, they raised some money, and they've made GiveWell a full-time project. Since 2007, GiveWell has moved over $1 billion to highly cost-effective charities, and we expect these donations to save over 150,000 lives. Our donor community is 100,000 strong, ranging from young children donating from their allowances to giving pledge signatories committing very major amounts to our recommended charities. So many nonprofits fail to have any impact, and that's not due to fraud or things like that, but even when charities faithfully execute their missions, they can fail to make a difference. And the trouble is it's hard to identify that by looking at published material. You may have heard of this example, Play Pumps. They're an organization that aim to harness children's play to pump clean water via merry-go-round equipment. And it was a very popular idea that raised tens of millions of dollars. The only problem was that it didn't work. Children didn't want to play on these because it was work and not fun. And the play pumps just cost more, pumps less water, and were harder to maintain than normal pumps that are being used. And since the children weren't using them, the parents had to use them, and that, as you can imagine, probably feels not great using a child's toy to get water for your family. And so even though this seemed like a really great idea at the time, that kind of opens up the question of how would you know that from the information that you're given? And so like as a donor, if you hear about something that sounds really exciting, how can you tell whether it's actually effective? And so that's where GiveWell comes in. Even if a program has a positive impact, few can do so at a low cost. Our current research pipeline demonstrates just how exceptionally rare it is to find programs that we wish to fund. So the qualities that we are looking for are programs that are independent evidence, proving their effectiveness, such as academic studies, like randomized controlled trials by development economists. We're looking for programs that are extremely cost effective, meaning that they are able to have a high impact at a low cost, and also need additional funds to expand and have more impact. And we deprioritize programs as we go through this funnel. Impact is not the primary goal of many types of philanthropy. For example, sometimes philanthropy prioritizes equal access to a good or service, regardless of how expensive or hard it is to reach a certain population. Funding equal access programs is important, but because so few philanthropists focus on impact, that's where GiveWell is able to have a really transformational support to these neglected areas. So GiveWell is best known for our top charities list. We publish a short list of recommendations so anyone can come to our website, read about these programs, and support their work. They're extremely high impact, and there's a lot of evidence supporting their programs, and we've worked with them for many years, so they're the programs that we are the most confident in. We have 4 right now. 2 are focused on malaria prevention against Malaria Foundation and Malaria Consortium. 1 is focused on vitamin A supplementation, which protects the immune system for young children, and that's Helen Keller International. And then we have new incentives, which provides incentives, conditional cash transfers as incentives for caregivers to get their young children vaccinated. We also offer a top charities fund, which quarter, we allocate the pooled amount of funding to the most urgent needs amongst our top charities at that time. So it's really taking advantage of our researchers' most up-to-date information and the funding needs of these organizations. And we take a cut of donations that are received for our top charities or other grantees. Our operations are supported by a specific group of donors who choose to support our work. So here's kind of just like our overall process. Our research team spends a lot of time working on researching charity. We're looking for opportunities that we can recommend to donors. And we don't start at the charity level. We actually we start at the program level. So we are looking for evidence on programs that are cost effective. Charities don't usually provide or have this evidence on their own. And so that's why we look to academic research, typically randomized controlled trials that are peer reviewed to learn what programs are effective. And then once we have that established evidence base, then look for experienced programs that are implementing that program at scale. And so we then will make like a cost effectiveness analysis to determine how cost effective these programs are. And so we're looking at their spending, their distribution, procurement, where they operate to see if they are having this impact. We also consider other considerations like the budget and details from ongoing monitoring. And monitoring and evaluation is very important to us. We encourage organizations to spend on this as we incorporate the data into our cost effectiveness analyses and also for future ones as well. And that keeps us calibrated and helps us determine differences between countries and areas, in addition to differences between programs as well. And then finally, as I kind of mentioned previously, if they're able to use additional funding effectively as well. Once a charity becomes on our top charities list, the implication is that they will receive more funds. And so we just want to make sure that they are using those funds as cost effectively as when they first became on our list. And so, yeah, now this is kind of just like an example, a walkthrough of how we kind of model our cost effectiveness, which is one of our core criteria for grant making. So many organizations share optimistic estimates of impact to get support, but we really try to find the most realistic estimate of impact as possible. And so here is an example of if you gave $4,500 to one of our top charities Against Malaria Foundation, which provides insecticide-treated bed nets to protect against malaria transmitting mosquitoes. So we of how much these nets are. And then after that, due to like data that we have from monitoring and evaluation, we know that roughly 79% of the nets are actually used. And then we also know through this data and monitoring that how many people use a single net. So we can apply a downward adjustment to those benefits. We also have information on the differences between geographies. So for example, nets have a shorter lifespan in the Democratic Republic of the Congo versus Guinea. And so we would incorporate that into our modeling. As you can see, we also take into account that evidence the spread of malaria. And again, this helps us just make sure that we are supporting organizations that have a direct measurable impact on the people that they are aiming to help. And so all those inputs help us determine a realistic cost effectiveness analysis for determining the cost to save a life. We also do a significant amount of grant making to grantees outside of our top charities list. For the past couple years, we directed roughly 70% of our funding to our top charities and 30% to new other grants. And so fall in the categories that are listed here, and whether that is like scaling up a program so that they could potentially become a top charity in the future, or funding research if there's no available academic evidence for a program to determine its cost effectiveness, or kind of one-off opportunities. And so donors can support this work through our All Grants funds, which takes into consideration the highest priority funding needs amongst all of our grant making, including our top charity, but also kind of these newer areas as well. And as I mentioned also previously, that we think at the margin and only fund a charity if we believe additional funding will allow it to do additional good. Sometimes an effective program can't absorb more funding because it already has sufficient funding from governments, corporations, or other foundations. For example, infant vaccination is a very cost-effective, evidence-backed program. However, there are not many cost-effective ways to help out because there's already many funders in this space, particularly Gavi. And so GiveWell, we wanted thinking about ways that we could help in this space, and we found kind of a more narrow area to do this, which is through programs that generate demand for vaccines. So this is our GiveWell, our top charity, New Incentives. They identified that while vaccines are readily available and provided free by the government of Nigeria, many people weren't taking that up, and there was just a lower coverage rate for vaccines. And so they decided to provide conditional cash transfers to increase that, the vaccination rates in the areas where they operate. And so this just shows that like a program is only cost effective when it's coupled with the funding, but with funding gaps, and so that donors can unlock impact and then achieve the most good with their donation. Great, so I know that was kind of a quick overview, but I just want to thank you, and we're now gonna open it up for questions. So I will stop sharing my screen. Does anyone have any questions?
Great. Erin, thank you so much. Round of applause for Erin. Okay, I'm in frame now. Good. So we have one microphone at the front. I might need to echo, but maybe you'll let us know if you can hear the questions. So just to repeat, feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. Is it open?
Yeah. Hello. Thanks for your presentation. And I just wanted to make sure I understand your work. Like, how much of your evaluation process is kind of like synthesizing existing research, and how much of your work is also like kind of like getting the data from these charities and then analyzing it independently, or does that latter step happen at all?
Did the question come through okay?
It did, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so definitely, as I mentioned, we do incorporate both aspects, and we start at the academic research first before we kind of dig into the charities and the way that they monitor and evaluate their program. And so we are really making sure that the program we're just comparing it to like the academic evidence, and so like the external validity of whether that how that research would actually go in practice. And so the research is kind of like our baseline, and then we are looking at how the programs are working in real life. Olivia, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, I think that covers it.
Does that make sense?
Good. Thank you. Yeah, Corey?
How do you come to the 30% kind of discount for the like changing behaviors of other funders? And do you account for like, you know, whether those other funders are going to be giving that money to other really good things that are almost as good as what you would be giving it to, or how do you think about that? That seems really hard.
Yeah, it definitely is challenging. And the 30% figure that we're using in that particular cost effectiveness analysis is particular to that intervention in Guinea. So to nets in Guinea at the time when we were making that grant. So our adjustment for leverage and funding, which is leverage, the extent to which us contributing to something unlocks other funding and causes other funders to contribute more to it. And then funding for fungibility, the extent to which our funding kind of crowds out other funding. So for each of the grants that we make, we come to a grant specific estimate of how much we should change our cost effectiveness because of its impact on other funders. So sometimes it makes the grant look more cost effective. Sometimes it makes the grant look less cost effective. And the way that we kind of get to our estimate of that should be. Often it comes a lot from talking to actors in the space. So talking to the National Malaria Control Program of that country to kind of see what their alternative source of funds would be if we didn't fund it. And then also thinking about how close in time we're getting to the gap. If, it's something that, is coming up really quickly and we think that we're, maybe the funder of last resort, then we might put a very low adjustment for fungibility in there. So we try to incorporate as many things as we can. And I believe in most of our cost effectiveness analyses, we kind of go one level into considering what the counterfactual use of funding would be. We definitely incorporate that when we're thinking about leverage, when we're giving our cost effectiveness analysis a boost because of we think it'll crowd in other funding. We incorporate our best guess, which is, pretty rough, of the benefits of the benefits that government spending often could have if it was allocated to something else.
Thank you. Yeah, Sarah?
Yeah, I'm keen to understand it. Have you done any research on your givers about the impact of giving on them? So thinking particularly around sort of spiritual metrics and I guess working from a hypothesis that there's some value to come from supporters, both as part of their discipleship, whether they're giving, praying for a program, tracking that. And I think from a communications perspective, a lot of charities use that to say, give to us over the long term because there's a discipleship benefit from that. And I guess the impact perspective is really interesting to say, should I give to one charity this year because they're more cost effective and then another charity another year? I just wondered if you've done much research on the effect of giving on your givers.
Did that come through?
I think it did. It was a little far away. So is the core of the question basically whether we've done any research into how emotionally giving to GiveWell impacts our donors?
Yes, around the impact on them and consistency of supporting a particular charity over time.
Yeah, so we haven't done any kind of survey of our donors that asks them, in a quantitative way, how giving to GiveWell makes them feel or changes their perspective. We do spend a fair amount of time talking to GiveWell donors and hearing about, how they think about their giving and how they decided to give and how that impacts them. There have certainly been donors that I've talked to who have, told me that giving to GiveWell improves their life and makes them feel better about what they're doing and helps them find, to some extent, purpose. But we don't have anything really quantitative to connect to any of that. I think that there is a dynamic, or one dynamic we sometimes see when we're talking to donors is that they can, think of GiveWell as the less emotional choice. So we'll sometimes talk to people who say, I give most of my giving to GiveWell, and I also give 20% to more local causes. And then when you dig into why they're doing that, it's because they feel more emotionally connected to the local causes that they're supporting. So that's something that I think is to some extent baked into helping people that live far away and that you may never meet. It can be harder for people to draw that emotional connection. And so GiveWell's been, thinking about ways that we can help people connect better to their giving, both by, helping people by building relationships with GiveWell staff members who can tell them information about the impact of their donation, as well as, incorporating some pictures and more information about the kind of nitty gritty and what their funds are actually supporting. But it's definitely a challenge.
Thank you. I think we have time for about one or two more questions. Are there any other more questions?
Nobody else does. What types of academic research do you wish there was more of, or it feels like researchers, like questions that researchers don't ask enough of that would be more valuable for GiveWell?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes, like I mentioned, we do fund our own academic research, and that's for cases where there's not enough that will help us make a decision about whether a program is cost effective enough to prioritize spending on. And so one example of kind of a recent grant that we are going to fund is there's a new malaria vaccine, the RTSS, and there's been research about how that malaria vaccine will work with other existing malaria prevention work. And there's already research on how it'll work with seasonal malaria chemoprevention, which is one of our top charities malaria consortium implements. But there's not academic research on how it works with a different malaria prevention tool called perennial malaria chemoprevention. And so we're actually going to fund research on that to see how those programs will work together and whether that can be useful for governments to have that information, or if we can contribute future funding to support both of those programs as well.
A fun fact about that randomized control trial that we're supporting is there was a group of malaria researchers who were surveyed on what the biggest gaps they saw in the research were. And this was, I think, the second, number 2 for what they wanted to see, but I don't know what number 1 was. I realize it begs that question.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional questions? Lane? Yep.
So what metric does GiveWell use to measure its mission? So is the mission, for example, if it's poverty alleviation, what metric do you guys use to say, hey, we're improving this level?
Yeah, so I'd say our main goals are saving lives and improving lives. It's like the economic sense of that. It is a little bit tricky to like kind of determine GiveWell's impact. We can measure the impact of the programs that we are making, but it's a little bit more tricky to kind of determine our own impact. That said, we have a bar for funding. And so our funding bar is all programs that we've determined that are 10 times as cost effective as unconditional cash transfers, which are our baseline. And so if we determine and we find many programs above that bar of 10x, we would raise the bar to be 12x, 15x, because we want to fund the top priorities. But if we'll only fund those that we have. So I guess that's a way of determining like how cost effective the programs we are funding is. And then again, like measuring how much funding that is as well, or like how much goes out the door.
Great. Thank you so much. So I selfishly have one question to ask, and this is because someone in our community has been talking with charity navigators lately. I think they describe themselves EA aware. Some other evaluators are looking to move towards similar evaluations. Have you been discussing with charity navigators, and do you know more about the steps of them and other charity evaluators towards maybe more quote unquote EA approach?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Olivia. Do you know?
I don't think that we're in, active conversations with Charity Navigator, but we're very happy to see other organizations working on, getting past the more surface level evaluation into really thinking about the impact that a program can have on people's lives and how we understand that. The challenge that I think is faced by charity evaluators writ large is just that it can be very long and time consuming and difficult to do the types of in-depth evaluations that GiveWell does. And so, we don't have the capacity to do an in-depth analysis of every charity or even close to all the charities that we'd like to. So when another organization is, interested in casting a broader net than GiveWell, it just means that necessarily they'll have to be a bit shallower. So I see organizations like Charity Navigator and GiveWell as kind of working on, or is kind of catering toward different audiences, or working on different problems where, you know, they're focused on providing information about a broad range of charities to the people that are using their research. And we are really most interested in providing in-depth information about relatively few charities and providing giving recommendations to the people who are interested in people and organizations that are interested in using GiveWell.
Okay, thank you so much, Erin and Olivia, for being with us here today. And if any of the attendees have questions and would like to reach out afterwards, what's the best way that they can reach you?
Yeah, I have a swap card profile, so you definitely feel free to send questions there. You can also reach out to our email address. I can also send my email address to JD too, if anyone has any follow-up questions.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.